I know a few things about anxiety. You might know more than me, but that's fine. I think there's some things we can all agree on. I know that anxiety doesn't always make sense, but it is sure real. I know that it's a complex thing where you can get it from the way you're working through your emotions, through the situations you find yourself in, when there's physical things going on with your body. All of those things are true, but I also think there's something else that's true about anxiety. Whether it's emotional or situational or physical, it is always spiritual. And because it is all of these things, because it's always complex, we can treat it holistically. In fact, we have to deal with it holistically. So my wife has some anxiety. One thing that she's found is she has these magnesium gummies. And they make a huge difference for her because there's a physical trigger to what she's got. For others of us, counseling helps, or exercise, or getting enough rest. We find ways to cope with it. But while you don't want me to prescribe you medication or give you advice about what you might need to do with your rest cycle, there's that spiritual piece of anxiety that is still there. And because it is spiritual as well as all these other things, I have a belief about anxiety. And that belief is that it will hit everybody at some point. I told you my wife has some, but I also have had some moments with anxiety. Not as much as her, and it's not as regular as her, but it still shows up. Usually it shows up when I'm expecting it to, right? Like something catastrophic happens or I'm dealing with something incredibly stressful, and then the anxiety rises and I can point to exactly what is causing it. But there was a time not too long ago when that wasn't the case. It was the fall of 2021, and most people were happy to start returning back to normal. Schools were back flowing around us and everything else was going on. I just felt like I couldn't catch my breath. The shutdown of 2020 might have given some people some downtime, but it just ramped things up for me. Had to figure out whole new ways to do church, had to figure out how to financially juggle everything during that time. At the same time, our building was going through some pretty major issues that needed to get fixed, and we didn't know how to do it. We couldn't even find people to come and look at it and tell us how to fix it. And it was just like one thing on top of the other. And all of that was still there when things started to quote unquote go back to normal. And so what happened was it was all of the stuff that had been going on, all of the care that was extra that was needed for people during that time, all of the stuff that was being carried during that time, plus all of the new normal stuff back on top of it. And it was just like there was no rest in sight. And I found myself having trouble to breathe every once in a while. And I found myself not taking care of myself well, like sleeping less and exercising less and eating more. And I caught myself avoiding people or avoiding conversations because in my mind, I just couldn't take anymore. And if you've ever had that kind of feeling where you're like, no matter what else happens, I just can't take anymore. I am at the end of my capacity. You felt burdened, you felt overwhelmed, you felt anxious, your spirit has been heavy. Well, then I hope that what we share the rest of our time together today will help you. The Apostle Paul has what I consider one of those unreasonable demands of Scripture. There's some things in Scripture that you read them, and if you look at them at first, you're like, there is no way that this is possible. And the Apostle Paul has one of those in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. He talks about rejoicing in everything, and he will say it again, rejoice. And then he gets to this line that he says, be anxious about nothing. Is it even possible to be anxious about nothing in the world we live in? There was a shooting in Rich Neck Elementary School in Newport News, not far from us, a few weeks ago. In some ways it feels like yesterday, in some ways it feels much longer than that, but it sticks out in my mind because I have nieces and nephews that go to that school. And suddenly, things were very anxious and very nervous and very nerve-wracking when word came out that there was a shooting there and we didn't know anything else. how was I not supposed to be anxious then? I have friends all around the world, and I see their reports of the wars that are going on in their country. I see the ways that they are fighting slavery in the world today, and they're feeling overwhelmed by that. I see the disease that goes around us that we've just lived through and are still living in the midst of. I see heating bills that come back that are 3 times what they were the year before, and I wonder, is it possible to really be anxious for nothing? To the younger generation that's listening, I love you. I think your generation has an incredible ability coming up to change the world. But there's one thing that you have on lock that is something we've passed down to you and you've kind of perfected, and that is this ability to be stressed out and to be anxious. Are your grades really good enough right now? Are they going to be good enough to get into college? Should you even go to college? What if you grow up and you don't have money for college? Should you take out the loan or not take out the loan because it's going to weigh you down? And will the job you get pay enough money for you to live on? And will you be happy in your job, or do you need to find somewhere else to work? And then you jump up to your parents' generation, and some of us are sitting around and wondering, did we marry a cycle? Did we pick the right person, or was there someone else that would have been better? And is this person, is the way they're acting making me a psycho now because they're so crazy? And then the car breaks down, and your parents start to age, and you wonder how you're going to care for them when you're having a hard time caring for yourself, and your job keeps demanding more and more of you, and you reach this place where you've just had enough. And Paul says, be anxious for nothing. One thing I love about the Bible is there's this realness to it, even amongst those people we call the heroes of the faith, because they struggle with things that we struggle with. And one of the biggest ones struggled with is anxiety, depression even, worry. This is someone that really loved God, that really saw God move in incredible ways, and yet still struggled with these things. And he made some mistakes along the way in one situation that are the same mistakes I keep finding in myself, especially that period in 2021. Like, I was doing these things, and these things I was doing wasn't helping my anxiety, it was making it worse. And maybe you can relate to this guy along the way. His name is Elijah. He was God's prophet. He was the one that stood up to this super wicked king named Ahab, and God used him in some big and powerful ways. And in 1 Kings 18, we read some of the ways that God was using Elijah. This is kind of like the highlight reel, maybe, like the best of the best week of his life. And so he shows up, and God talks to Elijah and says, look, 3 years ago, you told everyone there was going to be a drought. Well, it's time for the drought to end, and I want to use you to help end it. And what it was going to require was this incredible royal rumble up on top of one of the mountains. And so the crowd of Israel gathered around, and in one corner you had Elijah, and in the other corner you had 850 prophets of Baal, the false god that they had gone after, that the king and his wife worshipped. And the winner of this battle was whoever's God would show up and show out. And so he gave them the chance to go first. He gave them all the advantages they could possibly have. And then when it was his turn, he made things as hard as possible for himself. He worked by himself, and then he got some wood, and then he took the water, which was precious because it hadn't rained for 3 years, and he drenched the wood, and he built a moat around it to fill it up even more. And then he prayed a simple prayer, and fire from heaven fell down and consumed not just the wood, not just the water, but the stones that the altar was built on. God of Elijah, who had set everything up, showed up with jaw-dropping power. And Elijah was on top of the world. That was his God that just did that. And so Ahab came back down, and he went to his wife Jezebel. And Jezebel was so bad that even though he was one of the most wicked kings ever, Jezebel made him look like Mr. Rogers. And basically she said, let me handle this. I'm going to make sure that Elijah dies. And when Elijah heard this, anxiety filled him that he had never experienced before. And it led him to make mistake after mistake after mistake that made that anxiety continue to grow and grow. So this is what it says in 1 Kings 19. It says, Elijah was afraid, and he ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, and while he himself went a day's journey into the desert, he came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. I have had enough. That was me. Maybe that's you. You're down to all, you've done all you can, and you still can't pay the bills, and you've had enough, and you just want out. You've tried all you can to fix this relationship that you're in, but it still hurts, and it still is damaging, and you don't know what else to do, and you've done everything, and you've had enough, and you just want a way out. Your schedule is crushing you. You work and you work and you work, and there's still more to do, and no one seems to appreciate the time it takes for you to go to work and then come back and clean the house and cook all the meals and make sure everyone is dressed and taking care of all of the trash and all of the laundry, and it feels like you're living a life where no one is grateful for you. And you've had enough. And you just want a way out. Well, if that's you, just like it was Elijah, maybe you've made some of the mistakes he made that we can see in these very verses. What did he do that was so bad? The first one's kind of hard to see. It says he went from Beersheba to Judah and then another day's journey. What we realize, if you look at a map, is that he ran himself into the ground. He literally ran over 100 miles. So if you know what it's like to be exhausted, then you know what it's like to be Elijah in this place. When I ask people, how are you? The most common response anymore isn't I'm fine or I'm good. It's I'm tired or life is busy or something like that. We live worn out lives, which is no wonder then why we feel so anxious all the time. We've got nothing to give to the situations we find ourselves in. My problem in 2021 wasn't that moment in the fall. It was the previous 14 months where I'd run and hadn't had adequate rest and hadn't had adequate time with God and hadn't had adequate time to take care of myself. The problem with stress and the problem with worry is it actually makes our brain operate as if we're drunk. It's the same kind of reasoning ability that's left in our mind. And so how in the world are we supposed to take care of ourselves when we're worn out? We can't make good choices in that place. And so when anxiety hits and we're exhausted, no wonder we do things to make it worse. Another thing he did is he shut people out. He left his trusted friend and servant behind. Anxiety wants to shrink your world till it's just you and everything else is falling on you. And in that place you can feel alone. A lot of times you feel like nobody else can relate to what you're going through in that moment. And you don't even feel like you can deal with other people. At least you can't deal with their noise, and you just like, would everyone just be quiet? Just go away, just leave me alone. I just need a moment. But that moment becomes longer and longer, and you feel more isolated and more lonely. And more lonely you are, the more the anxiety gets louder, and it's this cycle that we spin into. And one of the big problems with this is that we need each other. We are designed as relational beings, and especially when it comes to followers of God, we are incomplete without the family of God. And so when we try and do things on our own all the time, and we keep people at arm's length, and maybe we stop making that phone call, or we don't show up on Sunday morning, or we miss out on that group we said we were going to be with, or we don't invite people over for dinner anymore, we are missing out on this key to growing closer to God and closer to each other that fights off these feelings of anxiety that we have. And then the last thing that I saw him do in these places is he forgot that God was in the circumstances with him. He had reached a point of hopelessness. And it wasn't a rational feeling of hopelessness, like, God, I am so scared they're going to kill me. You kill me. I wish I was dead. But he's in a place where he doesn't have any hope of things ever improving, right? You've had enough. You don't see any way out. There's no way it's going to get better. And it's easy, the way that we are created, to see what is wrong and to dwell on it. When something is broken on your body, every other part of your body can be working perfectly, but all of your attention and your focus tends to go to the part that is broken. I know I broke my thumb, this one right here, when I was in middle school, I believe. And 7th grade, I was in a karate tournament. I was breaking boards. They ran out of the size board for the size person I was at the time, so they bumped me up. And I tried this move where it was really hard to do, and I ended up thinking I broke the board, but the sound of the crack was actually my thumb. And for several days, if not weeks afterwards, everything revolved around this thumb. The pain that was in, the things I could no longer do because I had to have a cast that went from down here at my elbow all the way up and then up my thumb, so I was always constantly giving people the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And everything revolved around it. When our anxiety hits us, a lot of times all we see are the things that are going wrong, the things that are negative, the things that are weighing us down. And we feel like it's never going to heal. We're never going to find peace. And all of these generational curses or curses that we find ourselves in, they are going to win. They're not going to be broken. So how did the God who called down fire from heaven and consumed all that stuff on that hill respond to Elijah? He was supposed to be God's top representative on the earth. And if it was me, I might look at Elijah and say, did you forget what I just did? I mean, you were there, right? When this fire came down and everything came up and we defeated all 850 other people you just stared down. You remembered my faithfulness then and all the other times before when I've fed you and housed you and helped people come back to life. I've done all these things, and this is what is freaking you out? But instead of bashing an ungrateful and forgetful coward, God meets Elijah in the midst of his needs. Whatever circumstance you find yourself in, God is there. And so, worn out, God starts to take care of that mistake. And he goes to Elijah and he gives him some food and something to drink, and then he lets him take a nap. And then he leads Elijah to a place where he could spend time with God and deal with some of these other mistakes that are making the anxiety that he's feeling grow worse and worse. And he's ready to talk with him. And the Lord said, "Go and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face, and he went out, and he stood at the mouth of the cave. And he met with the Lord. The last time we saw God show up on the scene, he had shown up on that mountain top with power, jaw-dropping power. And you think that might be what Elijah wants and what Elijah expects in this moment, but instead God shows up in a whisper. What's going on with that? I think something about it has to deal with the type of communication you give to different people. You see those big displays, the huge displays, that's like God shouting to people who are far away, to the people who have chased other gods who aren't close to him at all, and he's trying to get their attention. It's like some of you, I know, when your kids have gone out to play in the neighborhood, there's that one mom who can step outside their back door and shout, and it is heard for miles, because they are calling home their kids who are far away. But you whisper to the people that you're close to, the ones that you're intimate with. And Elijah needed to be reminded that God was in the midst of that situation and that he was close to him. You see, the devil loves to shout at us accusations about how we're not enough, or how we're going to be stuck in this situation forever, how we're worthless and we're alone. But the Lord comes near, because he wants to remind us when he talks to us and whispers to us about how close he is. Closer than a brother. Never forsaking us, never leaving us, not letting anything separate us from his love. And as God came and whispered to Elijah and reminded him that he was close, I wonder if Elijah went back and thought about his name. If you take the word Elijah and you break it down, it means, my God is Yahweh. That God, that's my God. But they would take it even a step further. When they were describing this, the way they understood God and who he was, they would also have said, another way to translate it would be, Yahweh is my breath. A whisper is a breath. And the breath is a source of life. So if Yahweh is my breath, if he's my source, then wherever he is, there's life and there's hope and there's power and there's peace. And if I can focus my attention on the presence of God, no matter what circumstance I find myself in, no matter what emotion I'm feeling, no matter what my body is telling me, if I can focus on the presence of God, then I have a key to overcoming the overwhelming. Realizing God is near is the key to overcoming the overwhelming. And God is so good that after this moment, he didn't finish taking care of Elijah. He said, hey, you feel like you're alone? I've got a whole bunch of other people that still follow me too. And in fact, we need to find one of them for you. Go find this guy named Elisha. And Elisha basically became the Robin to Elijah's Batman until he took on the mantle himself. And you're scared of dying? If you go to the end of Elijah's story, he didn't have to taste death. Instead, a chariot of fire from heaven came down and picked him up and took him to God. The thing he was so worried about, never had to deal with, never had to touch. Now that might not be the case all the time for you and I, that God takes away the thing that we're anxious about. But I can promise that God is near you even in the midst of your anxiety. Why don't you invite him to move, even in that place in your life? When you're burdened, when you're crushed, when you're overwhelmed, when you've just had enough, there is a God who is with you there, that is the source of everything you need: life, peace, wisdom, grace, all of it. And you can take whatever it is that's causing you your anxiety. You can take your anxiety itself and you can place it with him today. And if you're willing to focus on his presence, then you will have found a key to overcoming the overwhelming things in your life. And he will meet with you like a whisper. Lord, I pray that for some people that are hearing this, you will remind them again that you love them. And whatever they're anxious about, whatever they feel like they just can't handle anymore, you will show them that you are with them. That they can cast their cares upon you. That there really is a way to be anxious about nothing if we're reminded again about who we belong to. That the things we're worried about, they're not what give us life or peace or hope. You are. You are our breath, and you are with us. Help us to find you and focus on you no matter what is going on or what we're feeling, that we might find a way to overcome the overwhelming and see what ways you might prove yourself over and over again to be faithful and true in our lives. We pray these things in your name.